Hi, I'm Rowan, and last night, at a dinner meant to celebrate my wife's promotion to CEO, her father stood up, raised a glass, and called me useless. And then, her mother toasted to it. I thought that was the worst of it, until he looked me in the eye and said I was trash living off his daughter. That's when I smiled, stood up, and quietly canceled the beachfront house I was going to give them. But what they didn't know was that I had planned everything. And tonight, they learned what it costs to break a man who's already prepared to walk away. You ever wondered what happens when the silent one finally speaks? At the dinner celebrating my wife's promotion, I walked into the coastal restaurant with the hope that tonight might simply be about her success. The early summer air still clung to my shirt from the short walk across the parking lot, warm and salty from the ocean a block away. Inside, the lighting was gentle and golden, and the soft noise of conversations wrapped around the room like a practiced melody. I had been here before for smaller gatherings, but this was different. Ilara had just been named CEO, and half the people in the room were here to show her that they saw her as someone who had earned it. I scanned the main table first, expecting to find my name somewhere near hers. Instead, I saw the polished place cards arranged in perfect rows, each paired with crisp napkins folded with precision. My name wasn't there. A moment later, I spotted a card with my name printed slightly off-center, sitting at a smaller side table by the window, flanked by people I barely knew. The napkin was creased unevenly, like someone folded it in a rush. It was such a minor thing, barely worth noticing, but it caught me off guard. It brought back a memory I didn't ask for, of being told to sit at the kids' table during holidays long after I was old enough not to be there. The kind of quiet dismissal that cuts deeper because it's small. I took my seat slowly, trying to shake it off, but the feeling followed me like a shadow. The ocean breeze pushed through the window beside me, carrying the scent of salt and grilled seafood. I held on to that for a moment, steadying myself. Tonight was supposed to be about Ilara, not me. Not the old habits I'd spent years trying to outgrow. The first toast came before I had settled. Calden, my father-in-law, stood at the main table with his glass raised high, smiling broadly. At first glance, someone might think he looked proud. Then he spoke. "Ilara," he said, pausing for effect, "you've done incredible things. Truly. And you did it in spite of the dead weight around you." A few people chuckled, assuming it was light teasing. They didn't know his tone the way I did. He had sharpened it over the years, aiming it at me whenever he could, always in ways subtle enough to avoid confrontation. I kept my eyes on the condensation rolling down my water glass and reminded myself to breathe. The laughter faded. Calden wasn't done. He tipped his chin toward me with a smirk. Useless. This time, the chuckles were quieter. My jaw stiffened, but I didn't react. I couldn't. I'd learned early on that responding to this kind of thing only fueled him. I pressed my fingers against the uneven napkin, grounding myself in something physical so the sting wouldn't show on my face. Before the moment even settled, Vera stepped in. She looked elegant as always, her jewelry catching the warm lights overhead. She lifted her glass with an almost cheerful rhythm. "Well," she said lightly, "at least he's good for something," filling a seat. A few uneasy sounds rose around the table. Not quite laughs, not quite objections, just discomfort. The room seemed to shrink. Even the clinking of utensils grew faint. Ilara heard it all. I saw the way her shoulders rose, then squared. She stood slowly, her chair brushing the floor as she turned toward her parents. "That's enough," she said, not loud but steady. You don't speak to him like that. Not tonight. Not ever. That should have been the moment things quieted down. Instead, it cracked something open in Calden. He slammed his hand lightly on the table, enough to startle a few guests, and barked, "He's trash living off my daughter." I felt the words hit like a blunt impact. For a second, I wasn't in that restaurant anymore. I was 13, standing in my own childhood living room, listening to another adult call me a burden, a problem, something to shrink away in shame. I had thought age would give me armor. Turns out, some wounds stay thin. But I stayed silent. Not because I agreed, and not because I was defeated, but because something inside me shifted right there. It was almost quiet, like a switch flipping. The kind of shift that doesn't show on the face, but settles deep. I thought about everything I had done for this family. The plans, the kindnesses they never recognized, the beachfront house I had reserved for them because Alara always wanted her parents to have a place to escape to in their later years. The down payment I placed quietly. The gifts I assumed would bring us closer. I felt one clear thought rise above the noise. I will not sponsor my own humiliation. The uneven napkin sat in my palm, warm from my hand. And in that simple moment, I understood exactly what the first step had to be. Tonight, without raising my voice, without making a scene, I would start taking everything back. I didn't even realize I was moving until I found myself standing, napkin still clutched in my hand, taking deliberate steps toward Calden. The hum in the room dulled, as if the air had thickened with something unsaid. I wasn't storming over, wasn't puffing up my chest, just walking. The kind of walk that makes people pause because they're not sure if something's about to explode or fall apart. Calden watched me approach with that same grin he'd worn for years, the one that said, "Go ahead, kid, try me." He expected a sputter, a half apology, a retreat. Vera tilted her head like she was watching a child about to trip over their own shoelaces. But I didn't trip, and I didn't apologize. I just stood there, holding that crooked napkin like it meant something. And maybe it did. Maybe it was the perfect metaphor for what they saw me as. An afterthought. A wrinkle in the perfect setting. I didn't speak. Not yet. I let the silence hang there longer than comfortable. Then, without warning, a memory surged forward, uninvited but sharp as broken glass. I was back in the small kitchen of my childhood home. 10 years old, maybe. My 2 older brothers, 6 feet tall by then, laughing as they nudged me toward the back door. "No room for you here tonight, Runt," one of them said, his voice light but final. I remember my feet shuffling on the tile. I wasn't even mad. I was embarrassed. My mother glanced at me, then pressed a paper plate into my hand with a soft, hurried whisper. "Just let it go, Rowan. Keeping the peace is better." So I did. I sat outside alone, my dinner cold before I even started eating. That message stuck. Keeping the peace is better. It became my compass, my way of surviving, in school, at work, in this very marriage. Back at the table, Calden was still looking at me, waiting for the familiar collapse. He knew the silence. He thought it meant surrender. But this time, it didn't. This time, I looked at him, not like a scared son-in-law trying to fit in, but like a man asking a very different question. Why the hell have I been playing by their rules for so long? A hand gently landed on my shoulder. Ilara. She leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let's just go, babe. Please. This isn't worth it." And I loved her for saying it, for wanting to protect me when I should have been the one protecting myself. She was standing here, in her heels and confidence, a newly minted CEO, and yet still had to play referee because I wouldn't step off the sidelines. The anger that rose in me wasn't toward her. It was for all the times I let her fight this battle alone. From behind her, Calden chuckled, loud enough for everyone to hear. See what I mean? He hides behind her, like a child. Vera lifted her glass again and said, half laughing, "Let the boy breathe, Calden. He breaks easily." And that was it. The first real shift. I didn't break. I straightened up. Not dramatically, just enough to stand at full height. My hand left Ilara's shoulder gently. I looked at both of them and spoke in a voice steady enough that even the servers froze mid-step. "You enjoy playing king and queen in someone else's castle," I said, "but after tonight, you won't be hosting anything of yours there anymore." Calden blinked. Vera's smile faded, just slightly. Neither of them understood what I meant yet. But the seed was planted. I stepped back from the table and turned away, not waiting for anyone to follow. The door to the balcony was nearby. I pushed it open and let the night air hit my face. Cooler now. The breeze cut through my jacket like a reminder that the world was still spinning, even if everything inside me had shifted. The waves below crashed rhythmically, a sound I normally found soothing. Tonight, they were just noise, background to a decision I'd already made. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the documents folder. There they were. Everything I'd set in motion without anyone's knowledge. The beachfront house rental, the custom kitchen upgrades, the high-end outdoor furniture, the garden landscaping scheduled to start next week, the yacht rental booked for Sunday. All of it was for them. Gifts, gestures, peace offerings they never asked for, but would have happily accepted, pretending they didn't know who made it all happen. I tapped one, cancel, another, cancel. The screen flickered each time, confirming the action. Cancel, cancel, cancel. The final cancellation was the one that hit hardest. The private chef weekend I'd arranged for Vera and Calden. A surprise meant to say, "I know you don't like me, but I still see you as family." Gone. One by one, their future comforts unraveled in my hand. Quietly, efficiently. No revenge, no rage. Just boundaries. And to people like them, who thrive on silence, boundaries feel like betrayal. For the first time all night, my heartbeat slowed. My shoulders loosened. My spine felt taller. Inside, I could still hear murmurs through the glass. Ilara's voice rising in protest. Vera trying to brush it all off. Calden saying something sharp. But out here, on the balcony, I could breathe. And that was when something else happened. Something that told me Calden wasn't done with me yet. The moment I stepped back inside the dining room, the air felt heavier, like someone had opened a window and let in all the judgment at once. The conversations had thinned to murmurs. Faces I'd seen laughing earlier now looked away or forced polite smiles, unsure of where to look or how to act. I didn't blame them. This wasn't your usual celebratory dinner anymore. Only Calden looked untouched. He was settled back in his chair like nothing had happened, casually sipping from a glass of red wine. His arm rested over Vera's chair as he leaned toward her and whispered something I couldn't hear. Whatever it was, it earned a quiet smirk from her. Then she turned, chin slightly lifted, eyes scanning toward me with a look I knew far too well. Dismissive, certain. It was the look people give when they believe they've already measured you. That you'll take just enough to stay useful, but never enough to disrupt the order of things. My fingers brushed over the uneven napkin still in my pocket. I didn't hold it like a crutch anymore. It was a reminder now, a signal, like a knife cooling before it cuts clean. I moved toward the bar, trying to stay near enough to the table to see everything, but far enough not to be seen as lingering. A young server approached, voice tentative. "Sir, I wanted to say sorry about the seating earlier. That wasn't supposed to happen." His words caught me off guard. Genuine apology. No excuse, just accountability. I gave him a nod. "Not your fault." But that small kindness cracked something open in me. 16. I was 16 again. Sweat pouring down my back from hauling lumber all Saturday. My dad had finally decided to fix the backyard fence and said it was a family job. My brothers showed up late, stood around holding sodas, and bailed before the second post was even in the ground. I stayed, dug, hammered, braced every plank into place until sunset. When it was finally done, Dad looked over the fence, patted the top rail, and said, "Nice work, boys." And then he turned away. My brothers cheered, slapping each other on the back like they'd done something worth remembering. I stood off to the side, blistered hands in my pockets, heart thudding. And I didn't say a word. Not then, not later. Because I had learned early. If your voice shakes when you speak up, it's better not to speak at all. If someone claims your effort, let them. If they belittle you, swallow it. If they erase you, stay useful enough not to be missed. That night, by the fence, just like tonight in this restaurant, taught me to flinch inward, not out. To stay invisible if it meant keeping peace. But something shifted in me now. Not anger, clarity. I wasn't afraid of Calden anymore. I was tired of playing by rules that were written to keep me under his thumb. I turned and saw Alara walking toward me, her heels clicking softly across the hardwood. Her face didn't show embarrassment, but it wasn't calm either. Her brow was tight, her lips pressed together in that way that said she was holding too much all at once. "What did you do out there?" she asked. I didn't lie. I stopped letting them use what I provide. Her eyes widened, not in horror, but in realization. "You canceled the house?" I nodded once. She exhaled slowly. "Rowan, I want you to stand up for yourself. I do. But they won't take this lightly." "I know. They'll retaliate." "I'm ready." She searched my face, her gaze softer now. "Are you? Really?" And I realized, maybe for the first time, that she hadn't been waiting for me to be stronger just for me. She needed me to be stronger for us. She'd been shouldering everything alone, protecting me while climbing her own ladder. And I let her. Not because I didn't care, but because I thought staying quiet made things easier. But silence didn't protect her. It just made her fight both battles, hers and mine. "That ends tonight," I said, quietly but without hesitation. We stood like that for a moment, just looking at each other. Then the air shifted again. Calden was back at the center of the room, leaning in toward two men I recognized as board members from Alara's company. Not friends, colleagues. The type who smile wide and shake hands hard but never miss a chance to whisper something into the right ear. He was speaking low, his hand gesturing like he was painting a picture. One of them glanced at me, then looked away just as fast. I didn't need to hear the words. I knew exactly what Calden was doing. This wasn't just about pride or family dinners anymore. This was calculated. If he could make me look unstable, incompetent, mooching, he could make Alara look foolish by association. A CEO married to a man like that? That's the kind of headline people love to share in closed-door meetings. It's the kind that poisons credibility. Calden wasn't just trying to humiliate me. He was trying to chip away at her. He caught my stare, lifted his glass. "Some men build," he said, voice raised just enough to carry through the space. "Some men cling." It landed like a polite slap. Words dressed up in class, but sharpened underneath. I didn't blink, didn't smile, didn't rise to it, because now I saw him for what he was, and I'd already started cutting the strings he thought were holding me in place. But then Calden did something that crossed a line so deeply, even the staff froze where they stood. Calden shifted in his chair, the mic in his hand still live, and then he stood up. With the calculated ease of a man used to attention, he tapped the side of the microphone gently. Once, twice. "Everyone," he said, smiling that politician's smile, the one that never quite reached his eyes. "May I have your attention?" The clinking of silverware faded. Even the servers paused mid-step, pitchers hovering above glasses. The room stilled like it had fallen under a spell. Next to him, Vera sat taller, adjusting her scarf like a queen preparing for a televised address. Ilara instinctively reached for my hand under the table, but her grip didn't find mine. I was already rising to stand, even if just slightly straighter in my seat. "Before we continue this wonderful celebration of my daughter's promotion," Calden said, voice smooth through the speakers, "I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the support she receives at home." The room chuckled lightly. I saw a few guests smile, lift their glasses, nod. They thought this was a sweet, sentimental moment coming. But I saw his eyes, locked on me, cold, intentional. Ilara leaned toward him, whispering, "Dad, don't." He didn't even look at her, just lifted a hand, palm out, like he was swatting a fly. She recoiled half an inch, and my stomach turned. This, I realized, isn't a toast. It's an ambush. Calden cleared his throat dramatically. "You all know Ilara's brilliance, her work ethic, her ability to rise in any environment, no matter what obstacles are near." A chuckle from a far table. "Even as a little girl, she was outworking the room. You should have seen her building forts out of encyclopedias while other kids were watching cartoons." He laughed, and others followed, though some already sensed the edge in his tone. His gaze landed on me again. "And of course, there's her husband, Rowan." He said my name slowly, like letting it melt off his tongue. "He means well." The laughter stalled. A few heads turned. I sat motionless. Every muscle in my body wanted to shift, to run, to throw a chair. But I just watched him. "While some men find ways to match their partner's ambition," Calden continued, "others, well, they choose peace, comfort, time to reflect, you know? And there's nothing wrong with that." A woman near the front table tilted her head, concern replacing her earlier grin. A man next to her looked down into his wine, as if suddenly realizing it wasn't worth sipping. Ilara was frozen beside me. And that's when the gymnasium returned. I was 8 again, standing in the crowd, watching my 2 older brothers smile for the school talent show judges. They were holding the project I had built with cardboard, glue, and shaky hands. Alone. The glitter letters still crooked. They called it their work. My father stood in the back, arms folded with pride, nodding as the judges praised his boys. I held the extra poster board, the one we didn't use, the one I'd poured my heart into. When I tried to explain, just once, my dad leaned down and said, "Don't embarrass us. Let them shine." That voice, the warning, the threat wrapped in fatherly pride, was the same tone I heard in Calden's now. "You've done this before," I thought, "or someone just like you has. Same stage, same rules, different players. Calden chuckled into the mic again, soaking in the discomfort now taking root in the room. And to those who say every strong woman needs a strong man, well, I say every queen deserves a jester, keeps the court entertained. Laughter flared, and this time it had bite, but not everyone laughed. I heard Vera whisper something to a woman next to her, but I couldn't make out the words. Alara stood up beside me. "That's enough, Dad." He ignored her. Eyes on me. I rose, not fast, not with a dramatic chair scrape. Just stood. And suddenly, Calden's smile faltered. For a second, just a flicker. But I caught it. I stepped forward slowly. No rage, no rush. "I know what you're doing, Calden," I said evenly, loud enough that the microphone wasn't needed. "And I'm telling you now, stop." The room held its breath. He blinked. Just once. Vera leaned back, smirking. "He thinks he's serious," she muttered. Ilara placed a hand on my forearm, not pulling me back, but grounding herself to me. She was shaking. I didn't flinch. Calden raised the mic again. "You think you can threaten me, Rowan? You don't have the standing." That word, standing, not income, not title, not power, but presence. It was the thing I'd always lacked in my father's house, in my brother's shadow, in every room where I was only useful if silent. "You're right," I said, eyes locked on him. I didn't. I stepped closer. "But I'm standing now." A silence followed, heavier than before, the kind that settles deep in people's bones. And before Calden could put the microphone down, he made a move that proved he was willing to escalate far beyond insults. Calden didn't set the microphone down. Instead, he raised it again and tapped it twice, as if the silence needed reminding of who held control. "Since my son-in-law wants to be taken seriously," he said, turning toward the crowd, "let's put it to a vote." I froze. A vote. There was a ripple of confused laughter, scattered, hesitant, but he didn't laugh with them. He wasn't joking. Alara's hand clutched the edge of her dress. "Dad, no, this is beyond." He cut her off with a gesture, calm, measured, condescending. "Let's keep it simple," he said, eyes sweeping the room. "Raise your hand if you think Rowan contributes to this family." The air snapped tight. Chairs creaked under shifting weight, but no one moved. I could hear the ocean again, faintly through the glass walls behind me, like the world outside kept breathing while this room held its breath. Then, from across the dining space, a man raised his hand halfway, hesitated, then slowly lowered it when Vera gave him a sideways glare sharp enough to cut bone. Another woman whispered, "This isn't right." But she didn't raise hers either. No laughter now, no clinking of cutlery. I stood in the center of that stillness, and something inside me cracked. Not loud, not visible. Quiet. A fissure no one could see. Not rage, not even grief. Just something old, too familiar to scream about, turning over again like a bruise pressed too many times. I tried to swallow, but my throat was dry. My face felt hot, and the voice in my head started whispering things I hadn't heard in years. "They're right. You don't add anything. You're just decoration, a shadow they tolerate." My chest tightened as those thoughts multiplied like weeds. You thought standing up would mean something? All you've done is prove them right. My eyes drifted toward Alara. She wasn't looking at her father. She was staring at me. Her expression broke me more than Calden ever could, because she wasn't angry. She wasn't disappointed. She looked like she wanted to protect me and couldn't. That helpless love, fierce and aching, cut deeper than humiliation. It made my failure feel heavier, more personal. The room blurred at the edges. I felt smaller, like I was folding inward without moving at all. And then, from near the back, a voice rang out. Clear, young, nervous, but certain. I'll raise my hand. Heads turned. It was the server, the same one who had apologized for the seating mistake earlier. He stepped forward, towel still slung over one arm, chin lifted. I'll raise my hand, he repeated. He was the only guest who thanked us tonight, and he tipped every one of us, personally. There was a stunned silence. He looked at Calden, then at me. That counts as contribution, sir. The weight in my chest shifted, not lifted, not gone, but shifted just enough to let me breathe. Around the room, shoulders straightened. A few guests exchanged glances. A woman near the windows raised her hand. Another nodded in my direction. Not bold, not loud, but intentional. It wouldn't overturn Calden's opinion. It wouldn't erase the humiliation, but it cut through it, just enough to remind me I wasn't invisible. Calden's jaw twitched, just a flicker, but I saw it. The way a man recoils when the story doesn't play the way he wrote it. Ilara's fingers found mine this time. I didn't squeeze back. I couldn't. Because now I wasn't standing in this restaurant anymore. I was back behind that wooden fence I helped build with my bare hands, my father walking away with my brothers, never turning around. I was back in that gymnasium, watching the applause go to someone else holding my work. I was hearing every dismissal, every quiet erasure, every moment I chose silence instead of standing in my own name. The air felt too thick, my skin too tight. Ilara whispered, "Rowan?" I stepped back, not out of fear, out of necessity. I wasn't running. I was unraveling. My palms were sweating. I could feel each heartbeat behind my eyes. She reached for my arm, but I moved away, gently. "I need a minute," I murmured. I walked toward the exit, each step slower than the last, as if my body wasn't sure whether to collapse or keep going. The restaurant doors opened to the night air. I stepped out and leaned against the railing. The ocean was louder now, crashing against the shore like a pulse I could borrow. I exhaled, long and shaking. From inside, muffled voices continued, but out here, everything felt too quiet. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. But I did neither. I just stood there, arms crossed tight, eyes blurry, not fighting anymore, not giving in either. Ilara's voice came from behind me. "Rowan." I didn't turn around, because in that moment, I wasn't losing to Calden. I was losing to myself. And that's when I heard the restaurant door swing open behind me, louder than it needed to be. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. The wind off the water caught his voice before I saw his face. "I hope you're not planning on running home," Calden said. His tone was clipped, cold. He stepped out onto the deck, letting the door shut behind him like a judge closing chambers. The breeze lifted the corners of his blazer, but the man inside it was stone. His shoes tapped across the wood planks, each step slow and controlled, measured like everything he did. "Ilara deserves someone who can stand beside her," he added, "not someone who disappears the second things get hard." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Not yet. My mouth was dry. My hands were gripping the railing so tightly I didn't realize I'd curled my fingers into the wood grain. He stopped just behind me, enough for me to feel the heat of his presence without touching. "You embarrassed her tonight," he said, voice low and sharp. "You dragged her down. And for what? Some fragile sense of manhood you finally decided to dust off after all these years?" Dragged her down. The words cut through the air and lodged deep. They didn't just sting. They pressed on the rawest place in me. because this wasn't about my pride. It was about Alara, the only person I'd ever truly tried to protect, and he knew exactly where to aim. I turned slightly but still couldn't look him in the eye. The ocean had always calmed me, but even the rhythm of the waves felt off balance now. "I didn't embarrass her," I finally said, voice quiet but steady. "You did," he laughed. "Not the kind you share around a dinner table. The other kind. Short, hard, ugly. Son," he said, "no one takes you seriously. Not your family. Not this family. Not anyone." It should have rolled off me. I should have been immune to this by now. But instead, his words hit every insecurity I hadn't voiced in years. Not anyone. Not when I chose to step back to support Alara's rise. Not when I stayed home to manage everything behind the scenes. Not when I worked twice as hard to keep our world together and asked for nothing in return. But none of that mattered now. Because in his eyes, I had failed the only test that mattered, dominance. He stepped in close enough that I could smell the whiskey on his breath. "You're nothing without my daughter," he whispered. And there it was. The sentence he'd been holding in his back pocket for years, waiting for the moment I was low enough that it would land perfectly. But what he didn't know, what he never bothered to ask, was how wrong he was. Because while he thought I was dependent, I had spent years laying bricks beneath the surface, quietly, consistently. He didn't know that when I stepped away from my firm, I took equity with me. He didn't know the advisory work I'd done under NDAs, the shares I held, the accounts that were mine alone. He didn't know the family trips. I paid for those, quietly, discreetly. Not because I needed validation, but because I believed supporting Alara meant being a pillar, not a competitor. I never told anyone because I didn't want the spotlight. I just wanted to help her carry the weight. But tonight, for the first time, I realized how much I'd let people like him write my story with pens I handed them. Calden wasn't just speaking to me. He was speaking to a version of me that no longer existed. He saw a shadow, not the man standing before him, and I realized he still thought he had me cornered, but he didn't see what was shifting beneath the surface. I turned to face him fully now, straightening to my full height, the ocean behind me, the lies behind him. "You think you know me," I said, my voice firm, "but you've never asked me a single question. Not one." He blinked, the smallest sign of surprise. "You built this entire idea of who I am in your head," I continued, and decided I had to play the fool, the weak one, the charity case. He sneered. "You're not even important enough to be the villain." I let the words settle. They echoed for a moment, bouncing around the hollow place he wanted to keep me in. But something inside me didn't shatter. It clarified. I didn't need to be a villain. I didn't even need to be seen. I just needed to stop giving this man power over my silence. "I don't need you to respect me," I said. "I don't need your approval. I don't need anything from you." He took a step back, subtle, but I caught it. A recalibration. What he didn't expect was calm. What he didn't expect was a man who had finally, fully stopped asking for room to exist. And in that pause, barely a second long, I felt something rise in me I hadn't known I still had. Clarity. Not a weapon, not a shield, just a clean understanding of who I was, and who I was no longer willing to be. The wind picked up slightly. The door to the restaurant creaked behind us. Someone might have opened it and peeked out, but I didn't turn to check. Calden stood there, squinting at me as if he was trying to see what changed, and couldn't. But I knew he felt it. He must have sensed the shift. Because what he did next was more ruthless than anything so far. He held the phone between two fingers, like a magician about to pull his final trick. I didn't move. My body was frozen, not from fear, not anymore, but from knowing that whatever came next wasn't just about me. "You think you've found your spine tonight," Calden said, his mouth curling. "But let me show you how quickly I can break it." He turned the phone toward me. The screen glowed against the night, bright enough to slice through the sea air. It was an email, still in draft, addressed to the board of directors at Alara's company. Subject line: urgent, concerns regarding Rowan Vance. The body of the message: a character assassination, subtle in tone, but unmistakable in intention. Accusations of emotional instability, poor financial decisions, a suggestion that my presence, my mere existence, was undermining Alara's credibility as a CEO. I took one step back, not out of weakness, but because my stomach turned, not for myself, but for her. "She's worked her whole life for this," I said. "And you'd throw it away? Just to come after me?" He didn't blink. "She's my daughter. I built the name she carries. If she's going to lead, she'll do it with my permission. Or not at all." I couldn't look away from the screen. The draft was polished, well-crafted, aimed directly at the fault lines of corporate politics. He knew how male boards second-guess female leaders, knew the language that sparked quiet suspicion, knew exactly where to strike. "Why would you risk her career like this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "She's your daughter, Calden." He tilted his head slightly. "Exactly. That's why I can't let her end up with someone who pulls her down." The words made something burn at the base of my neck. Pull her down? After everything I'd carried quietly behind her? After the nights she cried herself to sleep on my shoulder, wondering if she could lead a company built by men who never believed in her? He waved the phone casually, like it was a remote control to my life. "If you ever embarrass this family again," he said, "I will erase you from hers." I couldn't speak. Not right away. Because I felt it. The rage, not hot and wild, but cold, controlled, focused, the kind that doesn't scream, the kind that remembers. I thought that was it, that this was the worst. But Calden wasn't done. He scrolled, tapped, opened another screen. "Thought I'd show you this too," he said. Text messages, between him and Vera, a long thread, longer than I expected. They'd been talking about me for months, maybe longer, picking apart every choice I'd made, my decision to leave corporate, my consulting work. They twisted my investments into risky hobby projects, mocked my business ventures as Alara-funded distractions. They made jokes about the beach house, calling it our little gift to keep him quiet. They spoke like my name was an inconvenience. They had to manage, like I was a dog they fed so I wouldn't bark. But one message, just one, hit harder than all the others. It was from Vera, sent earlier that afternoon. "Let him think he's part of this family. Tonight we'll fix that." Fix. Like I was a problem needing correction. That dinner, the seating, the microphone, the performance. It had all been planned. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't sensitive. I wasn't imagining it. It was a setup, a ritual sacrifice dressed up as a celebration. I reached behind me and gripped the railing, grounding myself. The pain wasn't sharp anymore. It was dull, heavy, betrayal wrapped in velvet. But that weight, somehow, gave me balance. Because in that silence, something clicked. They never cared for my silence. They depended on it. And now, they'd lose it. I lifted my eyes and met his. And something in me shifted. You've been planning this, I said, voice even. Plotting it. Coordinating with Vera. And you thought I'd walk back inside and play the part you wrote for me. He smirked. A flicker of confidence. But when I stepped forward, just slightly, something in his expression changed. Just for a moment. He hesitated. I already canceled every gift tied to your new legacy, I said. The house, the contractor, the upgrades you were expecting next quarter, gone. His lips parted, but no words came. And tomorrow, I added, you'll find out what else had my name on it. Not Alara's. Mine. The wind shifted between us. The phone in his hand suddenly looked smaller. This wasn't bluster. I wasn't bluffing. He knew it. Because men like Calden don't fear rage. They fear silence that moves. I backed off for years, I told him, because I thought peace was worth swallowing my pride. I thought staying quiet meant staying kind, but all it did was feed you. He didn't respond. He just stood there, still, calculating, waiting to see if I'd explode. But I didn't. I didn't have to, because clarity is its own weapon. And in that quiet, I took the first breath I'd taken all night that wasn't laced with shame. Then, behind us, the restaurant doors burst open. Footsteps pounded across the deck. The manager, red-faced, breathless, rushed toward us. Mr. Rice, he said, eyes darting from Calden to me. You need to come inside. Now. Calden straightened. What is it? The manager looked directly at him and said, There's been a situation with Vera. And just like that, everything cracked wide open. The manager stood in the doorway like she didn't know whether to step forward or run. Her chest rose and fell quickly, and her eyes were locked on Calden with something close to disbelief. There's a problem inside, she said, breath catching. A serious one, caused by your father-in-law. Calden stiffened beside me, jaw tightening like he'd just been accused in court. I didn't wait. I moved past him, brushing the doorframe as I stepped back into the restaurant. The energy in the room had shifted, fully. Conversations were hushed but intense. Heads turned as I re-entered. Some guests were standing in small groups, gesturing quietly. Others remained seated, whispering behind palms. The air wasn't celebratory anymore. It was dense with discomfort. I spotted Alara almost immediately, standing near the main table. Her cheeks were flushed and her hands balled at her sides. Her gaze met mine and softened, but only slightly. Rowan, she said, her voice clipped. He went too far. My chest tightened. What happened? She inhaled through her nose, working to stay calm. He didn't just talk to the board members tonight. Her mouth trembled for a split second before she locked it again. He tried to swap out your name card at the main table. I blinked. Swap it for what? Alara closed her eyes briefly. A card that said, depends on wife. A current of heat surged through my shoulders. I didn't need to ask if it was a joke. I didn't need to know if it had been stopped. The damage was already in motion. This wasn't about dominance anymore. This was public cruelty. Somewhere behind me, Calden stepped into the room again. His presence arrived like a second gust of storm air. Guests began to shift, not away from me, from him. The same people who had chuckled politely earlier now avoided his eyes. A woman at a corner table shook her head, muttering something to her husband. One of Alara's colleagues, a board member, stood with arms crossed, lips pressed into a tight line. And then the murmurs started. He really did that? God, what a bitter man. Disgraceful. Calden's head turned slowly, scanning the crowd like a general realizing the troops had deserted. He lifted his voice. People are exaggerating. But his voice cracked ever so slightly, and it didn't carry the same weight it used to. From near the bar, a young server stepped forward. I recognized him, same one from earlier. "I saw you do it," he said, clear and steady. "You took the card out of your coat pocket." A beat of silence. Then another server nodded. "I saw it too." A ripple moved through the staff. Tiny affirmations, quiet gestures. And just like that, it stopped being about me and became about him. I stepped forward. "This isn't about a card," I said, not raising my voice, but making sure every word landed. "Or a joke. It's about a man who built his self-worth on control." And when that control cracked, he started swinging. Several heads nodded. Someone whispered, "Finally." Calden scoffed. "You think you're going to turn my family against me?" I met his eyes. "I don't have to. You're doing it yourself." His jaw clenched. He looked ready to spit fire. "You tried to humiliate me in front of everyone," I continued. "You used Alara's career to hold me hostage. You turned a dinner into a spectacle. And now, everyone here has seen exactly who you are without me having to raise my voice." The room went quiet. You could have heard the ice settle in someone's glass. Then I dropped the strike. "Everything you think you gave this family," I said, louder now. "Half of it I funded. The beachfront house, my name's on the deed. The backyard renovation you brag about, paid with my earnings. The company holiday retreat last year, I covered the shortfall." Gasps, audible this time. I glanced at Alara. Her mouth was slightly open. Shocked, not at me, but at how much I'd never said. Then I delivered the final blow. "I canceled all of it," I said. "Every gift, every account, every dime I tied to your legacy. As of tonight, you stand on your own." Calden's face drained of color. I saw the calculation vanish from his expression. All that remained was disbelief and something dangerously close to fear. He opened his mouth, and what came out wasn't strategy anymore. It was pure flailing. "This is a setup," he barked. "He's twisting the truth. You all know me." The room didn't flinch. Some guests looked away entirely. Others shook their heads slowly, as if mourning a version of him they used to respect. Alara stepped beside me, not behind, beside. "Dad," she said, her voice even but sharp, "you owe my husband an apology." Calden stared at her like she'd just betrayed him in front of the nation. He reached for the back of a chair, like he needed it to keep himself upright. "You can't mean that," he said. "Not after everything I built." Ilara's face didn't move. "That's the point. You didn't build it alone." He turned, searching the room for an ally. Someone. Anyone. But no one moved. Even Vera, now seated off to the side, looked down at the floor. And that's when the final sliver of power slipped from his grip. He had lost the room. Completely. And that was when he made his final, desperate move. A move that forced me to end this once and for all. Calden's hand moved quickly, almost frantically, as he reached into his coat and slammed a thick, folded paper onto the dining table. The impact rattled the silverware. Several guests jumped in their chairs. Water glasses teetered. Alara flinched beside me. "This," Calden barked, unfolding the pages with trembling fingers, "proves your little story is nothing but smoke. I control this family, and I control what's mine." He shoved the papers toward me. I didn't touch them right away. I let the moment breathe, let him stand there, believing he'd turn the tide. Then I leaned in, just enough to see what he was trying to flaunt. A withdrawal authorization form. From a regional bank. His name scribbled across the top. The form was dated today. The ink was still fresh. The handwriting rushed, uneven. Ilara leaned closer and studied the paper, her eyes narrowing. "Dad, you filled this out tonight, during dinner, didn't you?" He froze, just for a second. But in that pause, the illusion broke. This wasn't documentation. It was theater. He thought he could fabricate evidence in real time, that a piece of paper, conjured out of panic, would erase everything else. What he forgot was, he wasn't the only grown-up at the table anymore. A low murmur spread across the room. Then, a board member stepped forward, someone I barely knew beyond a handshake and a name card, but his voice cut through the noise like a gavel. "Mr. Reese, you've spent years telling us about your generosity, your leadership, your standards," he said, tone neutral but steady. "But now we've seen something else, a blatant attempt to discredit your son-in-law, and a hastily written document that contradicts everything you've claimed before." Calden's face flushed, deep red spreading from collar to cheekbone. "This is harassment," he snapped. "You're all siding with him because he's... But he stopped himself, because even he knew the next word would give him away. So I said it for him. "You didn't resent me because I lacked power," I said, voice even. "You resented me because you couldn't own me. I didn't owe you anything, and that scared you." I scanned the room, faces I barely knew, and some I knew too well. Heads nodding, brows furrowed. A collective sigh, like the air finally had permission to shift. Calden's mouth opened again, weaker this time. "Ilara, you're really choosing him over me?" She didn't hesitate. "No, Dad. I'm choosing the truth." That landed harder than anything else. He turned away from her like the words had burned. His hand hovered over the back of a chair but didn't rest on it. Like he didn't trust anything to hold him anymore. The silence that followed was weighty, but not awkward. It was necessary. No one rushed to fill it. Then, quietly, a server approached, carrying a small silver tray. On it sat a torn piece of cardstock, and beneath it, a clean, unbent one. The original nameplate, the one from the main table, the one with my name. "Mr. Hale," the server said gently, holding out the tray, "we thought this might have been yours." I stared at it. Rowan Hale, guest of honor. The words looked sharper now, not printed any differently, but they felt new, solid, unshakable. I picked it up slowly, running my thumb along the edge. In the middle of all this chaos, this simple card brought me full circle. In the beginning, I'd felt erased. Now, I felt seen. Calden saw the exchange from across the room, saw the card in my hand, saw the way Ilara's fingers brushed my back. And in that instant, I think he finally understood. He had lost. Not just this argument, not just tonight. He had lost everything he thought gave him control. 2 security staff entered through the side hallway. Not in a rush. Calm, professional. They didn't need to escort him out because he was violent. They were called because he refused to leave. One of the board members quietly motioned them toward Calden. As they neared, he backed away from the table. "Don't touch me," he muttered, waving them off. I didn't follow him right away. I stayed behind with Ilara as the restaurant slowly began to exhale. The damage was done, but so was the pretending. Minutes later, I walked outside into the cold night air. The parking lot was mostly empty now, except for a few guests lingering near their cars. Calden stood near his SUV, his phone dangling from his hand. His coat was wrinkled, and his expression had lost all structure, just confusion now, mixed with something far older. He saw me coming and straightened. "You think you've won?" he said, raising his voice. You think this is over? I'll tell everyone you destroyed this family. I'll make sure they know you're the reason it all fell apart. I stepped forward until the distance between us was reduced to honesty. You already did that yourself, I said. You did it in there, in front of your daughter, in front of your colleagues, in front of strangers. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. The bluster was thinning. You tried to ruin her night. You forged documents. You insulted your own family. And you tried, one last time, to humiliate me in public. He moved toward me, one step, but Alara was faster. She stepped between us, standing firm. No, she said. You don't get to choose how this ends. We're done playing by your rules. He looked at her, searching for something he could still pull, but it was over. He looked older now, smaller, like all the years of pushing and posturing had finally come back to collect. Without another word, he climbed into his car, slammed the door, and peeled out of the parking lot with a screech that echoed too long into the night. We stood there for a while, Ilara and I, just letting the stillness settle. Behind us, the restaurant lights dimmed as staff began to clean up. The evening, chaotic as it had been, was finally reaching its end. Ilara leaned into me, her forehead pressing gently against my shoulder. I'm sorry, she whispered. You don't have to be, I said. Your father made his choices, and tonight he got to face them. She exhaled slowly. So what do we do now? I looked at her, not the woman trying to hold things together, but the woman who had finally stopped apologizing for someone else. Now, I said, we start again. No more shadows, no more secrets. Just truth. She nodded, and for the first time in what felt like months, I saw her smile. The wounds were still there, but they were ours to tend to, without fear, without hiding. And just when I thought the night was finally over, my phone buzzed with a message that made my heart stop cold.